companies spend over $20 billion on sales training every year. But if you ask the average rep how they learn to sell, the answer is almost always not training, but rather a great coach. This October, we're going to prove the value of sales coaching once and for all by finding the best sales coaches in the world. Introducing Top Sales Coach 2020, hosted by RingDNA and the Sales Enablement podcast with Andy Paul. This is your chance to win the prestige of being named a top sales coach, a $1,000 grand prize, and the opportunity to receive feedback from some of the top sales leaders and coaching experts in the world. Enter the competition in 3 easy steps. Step 1. Choose one of 3 pre-recorded sales calls at topcoach.ringdna.com. Step 2. Record a 1 to 2 minute video coaching the rep from your call of choice. Step 3. Submit your video and wait for the votes to start rolling in. Go to topcoach.ringdna.com and battle for the sales coaching crown.
Guided selling from RingDNA makes your entire sales team more effective by revealing exactly what reps should do and when to do it. Guided selling works by transforming sales data into a curated list of prioritized sales actions. So when reps start their day, they'll never again wonder which prospects and accounts or hot inbound leads to reach out to next. Guided selling even shifts reps' priority in response to real-time buying signals. Finally, even new reps can sell like seasoned ones. Let RingDNA be your guide to success. Learn more at ringdna.com/guided selling. That's ringdna.com/guided selling.
Even today, when I'm having a tough month or a tough quarter, that's a lot of what informs my ability to go back to the basics and say, well, where have I tweaked my pitch? Where have I strayed away from those fundamentals and how I'm explaining this solution to the customer? So, I think that was really significant, and just the courage element too, Andy, and being young and naive enough to not really understand how important the CFO of a Fortune 500 company is to the global economy, and just picking up the phone all day long and more or less demanding that they give me a few minutes of their time to make my case.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Leslie Venetz, and Leslie's the new Business Development Director for Procurement Leaders. Now, from time to time, I have the pleasure to meet people who have such a genuine passion for sales and a passion for helping others become the best they can be. And they are giving and giving back to the sales community, and Leslie happens to be just one such person. In this episode, we talk about Leslie's professional journey in sales and the unique barriers she's faced as a woman in this profession. We also dive into her sales work, which is a very unique challenge for a seller because she sells events and services for procurement professionals, right? She's selling to procurement professionals. They're not, just coming in and getting involved in a deal like you're selling to the sales or marketing department or what have you. Now, this is selling to procurement people. And Leslie shares some of her insights from her work about what sellers should be doing differently, what they should be doing better in order to sell to procurement folks. We'll also talk about Leslie's side gig and the content she's creating and sharing really to help all sellers. And it's some really good stuff. So all this and much, much more. But before we get to Leslie, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So where have you been sheltering in place?
Mostly in Chicago. I'm in my high-rise condo in Chicago, sort of looking out at the world I used to inhabit, but did get to spend 6 weeks in Montana. I'm a native Montanan, so that was a really lovely reprieve. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. That was nice. Yeah. So where in Montana?
So I grew up in Great Falls and have a huge Italian family. Most of them are still there. So went back and spent 6 weeks in my childhood home, in my childhood bedroom, which is, gosh, something I never thought I would do. But it was honestly a treat.
So did you feel younger being back in your childhood bedroom?
Did I feel younger? I don't know. I felt very spoiled because my mother is an absolute saint. And so every morning I'd wake up and, a pot of coffee had already be made. And my dad loves making breakfast. So I'd always have a fresh, full breakfast to eat. Mm-hmm. So I felt very spoiled while I was there. And my parents had also just picked up a yellow lab puppy. So nice. I was quarantining with a perfect little adorable puppy. So it was a pretty good combination for me.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds absolutely great. Yeah, we've been fortunate, my wife and I, the last week, we've been looking after my daughter's dog, sort of a German Shepherd mix. It was just absolute sweetheart. And it's like, yeah, this is a good time to have a dog, right?
Yeah, it brings a little extra dose of joy to the day.
Yeah, well, so you get at, if you felt you were being confined to quarters, it's a good way to get out and walk the dog and sort of see what's going on, as long as you're wearing your mask.
Yep.
Keeping your distance. So what took you to Chicago then?
I am, I would say, a very deliberate decision maker. So having grown up in Montana, and then I stayed there and got an amazing state school education for $15,000 a year. I knew, it was a pretty great deal. I knew though that I wanted to leave. I wanted an opportunity to live in the big city, to get closer to different cultures, different ways of thinking. So I made a big matrix on an Excel document, and on one side
you are organized.
It's just a little bit crazy, but on one side were all of the kind of big cities that I thought I might want to live in, and at the top I charted everything that at the time, at whatever 20 something years old was important to me, and then assigned point values. And Chicago just had the most points. So I sold all my belongings and moved without a job.
So, well, all right, we're going to dig into that. But what were the criteria you're using to evaluate where you wanted to go?
Oh my gosh. Well, some of them are what you would think, right? Job market, safety, stuff like that, sort of cost of living. Some of them were a bit more nuanced. A really important one was the ability to get home. How easily could I get back to Montana, and how much would it cost me? Luckily, the cost of those trips has gone down quite a bit over the last decade. And then stuff like access to live music. I'm a huge fan of live music and concerts and theater. So, it was a combination of what I think anybody would be looking for, and then a couple elements that were especially important to me.
And what type of music?
Gosh, I am pretty eclectic. I like everything from, I guess sort of the pop that everybody likes to underground hip hop. My favorite band is a band called Widespread Panic, which is more of like a sort of jam band. I'm all over the place. The only things I can't get behind, I really struggle with country music. Contemporary country music, not like the Johnny Cash.
Right.
And I can't get behind jazz music. I can't do it anymore.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, you're talking about like real modern jazz, or?
I don't like the way it makes my brain feel. It doesn't follow the I don't know, the sort of.
I've got some recommendations for you.
Okay.
We'll talk after.
I'm always open to trying things.
Yeah, I had never thought I was a big jazz fan, but actually I write to jazz. I find that's for me that's the thing when I'm writing, and I've sort of trained myself. I'm sort of like Pavlov's dog at this point. There's a certain jazz piece I put on, and I just start writing.
I love that. Well, it probably helps you with, I would think, creativity, because it's not predictable. It's probably forcing your brain to create new pathways.
Yeah, well, gosh, that'd be great at my age. I'm afraid I'm losing the pathways faster than I'm gaining them. So how'd you get your start in sales?
I absolutely fell into it, not intentional at all.
Like everybody.
I think it's a pretty common story. I moved to Chicago without a job, but had set up quite a few interviews at the time. It was right before the recession.
Mm-hmm.
So markets were booming. And I primarily was looking at like marketing because I got a marketing degree, or I was looking at nonprofits because I'd done a lot of nonprofit work in college, and it was something I was really, or am still really passionate about. And then quite a few event companies because I'd done a lot of work in that space. So, didn't have a lot of focus in terms of this is what my career path is, and ultimately ended up taking a sales position with an events company with the thought process of I'll show them I'm great at sales and then demand that they transfer me to a different, different business unit, different department. And
you mean like becoming a planner?
Yeah. Because they didn't have, that's such a popular position for folks. They didn't have any open positions at the time. So I took the open sales position, and it was almost immediate. Within weeks, I realized that I just loved sales. It was something that came very naturally to me, something that it was easy for me to get excited about every single day. And I decided pretty quickly that sales was it for me. It was something I wanted to make a profession.
So what were you actually selling?
So I was selling, they're called summits, which is, I don't know, sort of a fancy word for a small conference. But I was at the time selling to CFOs of Fortune 500 organizations, opportunities to attend these small, like 50-person, intimate closed door networking events. So it was kind of, into the deep end, selling immediately to Fortune 500 CFOs, like a couple of weeks after I graduated from college.
And I mean, you were obviously doing this on phone, I imagine.
Yep, all telesales. And it was old school telesales.
Meaning?
No computers at the desks even. You were working off stacks of paper. And then when you needed to send emails, you would get up and go use a shared computer to send off your emails.
Wait, this was like 2008 you're talking about, 2011?
Yeah. 2007, 2008, yeah. I'm telling you.
So this company, Marcus Evans, I take it, was not very well invested in sales infrastructure or marketing infrastructure.
No, they weren't. And I know because I'm still heavily connected to the company, they've made a lot of strides. And certainly not just for Marcus Evans, but for many companies, the pandemic has catapulted people forward on their path to digitalization. So I think it's still a bit old school, but hey, if it works for them, it works.
Well, yeah. I mean, they were only conservatively in 2007, maybe 20 years behind time. So obviously no CRM system. No. So how did you first of all, how'd you build your list? I mean,
yeah, I would say one thing that was extraordinarily well timed into, along with my entry to the job market, was LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the advent of LinkedIn.
Right.
Created my profile in 2007 when there were less than 1 million people on the platform for sure, but I think significantly less than 1 million people. But, had a chance to start building my profile and start connecting with folks immediately. So LinkedIn was a great avenue to get closer to my customer and build relationships where, there was a bit more of an opportunity to ask for referrals, ask for feedback, advice. But a lot of it was, going to association lists, pulling names off of those, going to the company website and digging through press releases to see what you could find.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of very creative Google searches with, quotations and quotations plus .xls to try to uncover a few names that were going to meet the criteria.
Google searches on a shared computer.
Correct. Yes, correct. I would do all my research at home.
I was going to say,
yeah, I would wait and I would get home and certainly straight out of the gates, I would do 2 or 3 hours of research a night every single night so that I was walking back into office the next day with fresh leads to be able to call. And that way I could spend my days actually on the phone because it's, maybe not surprising, but CFOs don't tend to pick up their office lines that often. So it takes a lot of calls to get to them.
Right. So tell us what you were doing. I mean, how were you recruiting their assistants and so on to help you get in front of them?
Yeah. Interesting process in that we were not recruiting assistants at all. And, it's funny because I think that mentality stuck with me for many, many, many years, that gatekeepers are enemies. And, you don't want to give them any information. You don't want to leave any messages with them.
Well, where was that coming from? Was that the sort of the culture in the company? Or,
Definitely the culture in the company, but anecdotally, a lot of it sussed out. Like you would see your colleagues sort of cave and not follow the process, leave a message with an admin, and it was done. The lead was burned. They were never going to let you through to the CFO because now they knew why you were calling. And particularly because you were selling an event and so it had a specific date. It was such an easy opportunity for the admin to get the date and say, no, that person's not available. Right. When, we know that when we reach the CFO and actually talk about who else is going to be there and what topics are being discussed, that more often than not, the CFO would make the time. They'd rearrange their schedule to be in that room. So, definitely company culture, but anecdotally, it didn't go well when we did try to leverage gatekeepers. So it was an insane amount of cold calling, just absolutely insane amount. We also didn't leave voicemails. So it was just cold calling until somebody picked up the phone.
Oh, wow. Sounds like such fun. So what did you enjoy about it?
I learned a lot. I learned a lot. Gosh, I mean, just in terms of the importance of an impact statement, the importance of speaking the language of your customer, and making sure you're not going into those conversations with fluffy language or the kind of that internal lingo that only means stuff to your staff. So It helped me really refine my pitch, refine my impact statement, really understand what was going to be most compelling most quickly for my audience. And I think even today, when I'm having a tough month or a tough quarter, that's a lot of what informs my ability to go back to the basics and say, well, where have I tweaked my pitch? Where have I strayed away from those fundamentals and how I'm explaining this solution to the customer? So, I think that was really significant, and just the courage element too, Andy, and being young and naive enough to not really understand how important the CFO of a Fortune 500 company is to the global economy, and just, picking up the phone all day long and more or less demanding that they give me a few minutes of their time to make my case. So it was a really good experience. What did I like about it beyond that? We would sell a ton of different summit. So I wasn't always working with CFOs. I'd switch and I'd be selling to CHROs or CTOs, or later I got really heavily invested into building out our energy portfolio. So, transmission companies, power companies, and that opportunity to constantly be learning about a new vertical, and that opportunity to always be flexing the sort of curiosity muscle was really compelling to me.
My type of person. So you got your first management experience at Marks Evans.
I did.
And were you the proverbial top rep that got promoted, or did you want to go into management?
Both. I was a top performer. And, I sort of deeply disagree with the premise that top performers should automatically become managers, that's the natural next step. I don't think that is the correct thinking. In this situation, I not only was a top performer, but I was also really passionate about opportunities to coach and train and invest in my peers.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, especially when you have an opportunity to partner with and invest in those more ground level or entry level folks, because they're often so hungry to learn and to grow that you see such an ROI on the information you're giving them, and they rush to the phones to put it in place. So it was a little bit of both. I was doing the job well, and I felt like I had a lot to offer my peers and helping lift them up, and helping them better understand the process and execute it to close some deals.
I mean, I'm very interested in this peer coaching thing, because I was in a conversation yesterday with a well-known sales industry analyst who was putting forth the case that, in his perspective, the future forward in sales in terms of bringing more coaching to sellers was really peer coaching. Mm-hmm. And trying to more formalize that within companies and provide incentives for people to do peer coaching and so on. I mean, were you structured about it, or was it just sort of ad hoc, or how'd you approach it?
Very structured. I will say that the role at Marcus Evans came with an incredible amount of training, and part of that was coaching. And while they were maybe a bit behind the dime on some technologies, where they did have great technologies was the ability to shadow calls, do live call coaching, record calls, and have a chance to sit down and go through them with staff later. So a positive was that there was a very active culture around the importance of coaching, and certainly a mindset that everybody needs to be very, very open to being coached live on the open sales floor, which, I think that's another skill set to build straight out of college is being critiqued by your supervisor in front of all of your peers.
Being coachable.
And realizing that they're doing it to make you better. And if you listen, you're going to then reap those benefits.
But you were, and just back to make this point about peer coaching, but you were doing that before you got promoted.
Yeah, definitely.
And so was being promoted one of those things where, I mean, in my case, my first promotion, my first job, I just remember the manager saying, because I was doing the same, and him just basically saying, well, you're fundamentally already doing the job. So why don't we just formalize it and make you a sales manager?
Gosh, I don't remember if that conversation happened. I don't know. I think based on what I remember, if I'm being honest, it was probably more like, okay, you just hit your numbers every month for the last 6 months. You're eligible for a promotion. Do you want it? I think it was probably a bit less romantic than, Leslie, you're doing such an incredible job, peer coaching. Let's highlight you.
They didn't say it that way. Let's be clear.
But I think it's a really interesting point that you make.
Yeah, my boss had always said that, so that, I'd asked him once, I'd said, well, how do you know when somebody's ready to be promoted? And he said, when they're already doing the job.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a platform that I contribute to called Almanac.
Yeah, I checked that out.
Yeah, I love Almanac. And it's interesting because I just contributed a document on moving from IC to manager. And one of the 4 critical pieces of advice I gave was start doing the job, start becoming that mentor, start acting like a leader, start speaking like a leader, and you are, positioning yourself to be promoted much more quickly. So
you're giving a cue to management. You're giving a cue to management that, I'm somebody I'm just not a top performer that you should automatically promote, but I've got an interest in this.
Yeah. And I think an extension to that is, at least for me, something I've found very important in my career as a manager is to continue to lead from the front. So I've always maintained at least a small portion of my own territory or some key accounts, so that what I'm asking my staff to do, I'm also doing to the extent that in my current company, which is a research and advisory company, I turned down a promotion because it was going to be purely management with no opportunity. And I'd be hiring all new people that had never seen me sell before, with no opportunity to do the job and really show them that I am worth listening to. So, I love that concept of not just peer-to-peer coaching, but coaching from a viewpoint of somebody who's also doing the job.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, so what you're bringing up is this idea is that, and I'm a believer in this, by the way, is that sellers need to see their managers talk the talk and walk the walk. Mm-hmm. And this role modeling is hugely important. And I agree with that 100%. I mean, it's I always try to think of a time in all the years I was managing teams and growing sales teams at companies and so on, where I didn't have something I was working on myself as well.
Yep.
I think it's really important. I think it's a lesson that gets missed oftentimes by managers, especially these days where managers are weighted down oftentimes by reporting requirements and keeping track of KPIs and yada, yada, yada. And they claim they don't even have time for coaching, let alone working a deal themselves.
Right. Yeah.
So when you were at Marcus Evans, and was this a predominantly male-oriented sales organization? I mean, was was there somebody there that similar role, other women or a woman manager that sort of could help you develop?
No, there sure wasn't. It was it was definitely. Oh gosh, I think when I started, it was all men. And when I left, it was me and one other woman sort of in the management. But
over the course of how long were you there?
9 years.
Well, given the rate at which they're adopting technology, that's probably a rapid pace for them.
Rapid pace. And certainly the entire senior leadership team, both the global senior leadership team as well as the leadership team sat in the Chicago office, all men as well. So, I was really lucky that for a good chunk of that time, probably about 4 or 5 years, I think his title was COO. The COO of that business unit was a great mentor to me. And that doesn't mean I always agreed with his advice, because I thought some of it just was not as applicable to me as a woman trying to make my way in the business. But he was a really strong advocate for me. And I certainly valued that mentorship. But I've always really struggled to find a female mentor. Like I've never had somebody that I would really point to and say, you were another female in sales that I was a long-term mentor that I would say really, supported my growth. You were fundamental to my growth. And I think I'm not the only woman in sales that has struggled to find female mentorship.
Well, and to that point, I mean, is that mentorship within the company or just sort of in the profession in general? Because I was just wondering if there have been particular women sort of in the global sort of sales ecosystem that have been particular role models for you.
I think role models in that I read their content and I like what they're saying. But I think more than mentorship, Andy, I've had some incredible thought partners, folks that are maybe at a similar point in their career path to me, but are excited about the profession, are excited about, the hashtag right now, what the women supporting women hashtag, but that take it really seriously. And I think those individuals being a voice that lifts me up, helps, lean in on those days where I'm maybe experiencing a bit of imposter syndrome, that challenges me to have tough conversations about diversity, about equity, about pay. I think less than a mentorship, I have really focused on finding those thought partners who I know are going to empower me and like for like, I'm going to have a chance to empower and lift them up.
Right. Well, I mean, what I liked about when I was doing research for this interview is that you have been involved pretty actively in sort of giving back. I mean, you talk about Almanac, you're posting on Almanac. You were active on Quora up to a point.
Yeah.
So, and providing, tons of answers to questions. So are you finding people, sort of women that are earlier in their careers, are responding to that? Because I presume they have the same issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my mentality in general is that for me, it's just a lot of institutional knowledge. It costs me a little bit of time, but no money to share that. And a lot of what I share are the things that I was desperate to understand and didn't know where to find them when I was new. I do get some really personal and lovely notes from women who are starting in sales and marketing, asking for bits of advice or sometimes just saying, wow, I just read this answer that you responded to on Quora. And it really means a lot to me than just to know that I'm not alone in how I'm thinking or how I'm feeling. So I love giving back, not just in a professional capacity, but through broader volunteerism. And, I think that mentality of empathy and that mentality of creating a community, or recently a friend that's a realtor put it really well, that mentality of open palm instead of closed fist.
So appropriate these days.
Yeah. And it's the way I want to live my life. And in sales, it's turned out to be a really good mentality, because you have folks that then come back to you with referrals, or they couldn't buy from you in one role, but they remember that you treated them with kindness.
Right.
And then when they switch to a new role, they say, hey, let's talk. Let's see where we can make something work. So it's interesting, because it was certainly not an intentional sales style or maybe sort of way of living my life, but it's one that has really had some lovely benefits.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I want to touch for a second, because I find what you're currently doing, the company called Procurement Leaders, is interesting, because on one hand, it sort of sounds like a salesperson's worst nightmare, is that you're actually selling to procurement as opposed to procurement being involved in the process. So tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, you are not wrong. It is an interesting adventure into sales. So it's a solution sale. We are working with procurement teams to help them act more strategically, to be a more strategic partner to the business. And that's a combination of the sort of advisory piece or plugging them into other folks in the community that are doing it, along with the research piece, giving them access to a portal full of great strategy research, insights, tools, etc. So I think two things make it really complicated and also then very interesting. One, the solution is massive. It's designed to be everything for all people, which makes it difficult on an intro call, on a discovery call, to really summarize in a meaningful way. So, a positive of that is coming into this sale, I ditched the pitch deck. I don't pitch off a deck. I ditched the sort of step 1, step 2, step 3. And my first call now is entirely focused on getting to know the prospect and understanding their needs, their constraints, their dreams. And I found that then allows me to move on to a second call with a bit more of an intentional focus in terms of what part of the massive solution is meaningful to them. And I'm so thankful to work for a company like Procurement Leaders, who, when I was a couple weeks in seat and told them I'm not going to pitch off a pitch deck, they were like, okay, yep, we trust you. So, yeah, so that's really lovely. But certainly the other part is pitching to procurement, pitching to people that often have, master's degrees in rhetoric and negotiation. So it's, I think procurement too often is sort of seen like the redhead stepchild in their organization, and where other folks see them as maybe a hurdle to overcome.
Oh, a black hole to be avoided.
There was
Yeah, at least one author last year published a book, sort of saying avoid procurement in all cases. And I have to admit, in my career, I always made procurement allies as much as I could.
Yeah. I'm rereading The Challenger Customer right now, which is,
It's a great book.
written by CEB, or when I guess Challenger was owned by CEB,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they had a huge procurement arm. So they talk a lot about that. Procurement is the black hole. How do you make procurement an ally? But what I found when pitching directly to procurement is that they are not as willing to spend money on themselves as they might be to spend money on other parts of the business. So a lot of the work I do is, I almost think like inspiring some confidence in them. Like, you really deserve to have this voice in your company, and you really deserve to have a partner that can help you get there.
And then building their self-esteem.
A little bit. And then we get to the negotiation process, and maybe then 6 weeks later, after I've cried in a corner, we finally have a contract in. But it's been a really interesting role. It's really forced me to find some new and creative ways to sell, to connect with the customer, to go through the contracting process. So I've really appreciated the opportunity and experience.
So what are you hearing from the people you're selling to about their experiences with sellers?
It's interesting because a lot of the conversations we have are the dynamic of internal stakeholder relationships versus external supplier relationships. And what we see again and again is that procurement loves their suppliers, and they feel very, very aligned to their suppliers, their established suppliers. But there's a huge disconnect with their internal stakeholders. So, it's interesting from a salesperson's perspective, because let's say you're trying to sell something to marketing, and then procurement enters the scene, and you all of a sudden put your opportunity from stage 5 back down to stage 1. But it's often because procurement thinks that they know what their stakeholders want, and they think they know what the business wants them to deliver. But when you actually talk to the stakeholders, it's quite a bit different. So it's a whole piece of research. It's a whole pillar of our research that we work on with members to help them understand that the need to be closer to their business partners, and the need to speak the language of the business, like we as salespeople speak the language of our customers, to bridge the gap there between what they think stakeholders need and what they actually need.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds as if that, based on what you're saying, is that oftentimes what sellers experience is sort of this disruption in flow and through their process really starts from their stakeholder, their primary stakeholder that wants to buy what they're selling, not being sufficiently clear with procurement. In fact, in many cases, probably having the same dread of dealing with procurement as the salespeople do.
I think that's spot on.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting thing from a perspective as a seller, is think about that, is because, there's this irrational fear of procurement, and we all had negative experiences. But, when I go back and look at the negative experiences in the light of things like what you've said and others, it's like, oh yeah, I could have fixed that, or I could have addressed that in most cases. In some cases, there's a few cases where it just wasn't possible. But these days, as you said, is procurement acting much more a strategic business partner of the internal clients. Yeah, my experience has been is that, it's a different ballgame out there.
It is. I mean, the data shows it too, when you look at the uptick in how many influencers are now part of a decision. And influencers, maybe if you're selling to marketing, they're not even 5 to 8 or whatever the statistic is today. It's not even necessarily 8 influencers within marketing. It might be 5 in marketing and 1 in IT and 1 in legal and 1 in risk and 1 in procurement. And I think of reality for salespeople, if they want to not just survive, but thrive, is understanding that you are probably working with cross-functional influencers and not just selling sort of at them or to them, but giving them the tools that they need to be able to sell your idea, their idea internally, because that's what's happening. You hang up the phone or you get off the Zoom and they now have to go sell.
Right.
And it used to be we got to sell to everybody directly, and now we are having to equip other folks to sort of do the job for us, do the second layer of the job for us when we get off the phone.
Yeah. No, very interesting. So I wanted to ask you, you've got a little bit of a side hustle going.
A little bit.
So the sales team builder. So this is part, I think, of your giving back. So what is Sales Team Builder?
Yeah. So, I think ultimately, Andy, long-term goal, I'd like to do sales consulting as a full-time profession, which speaks to that desire to coach, to train, to invest. And right now, what I've been doing this year is really just giving a lot of time away, because I've seen so many people lose their jobs or have their pipelines completely collapse. And heck, things are not all rosy on my end as well. So we're figuring it out together. But trying to lean in where I can to help the sort of broader sales community. What I do when maybe markets are better is a lot of folks. I would say it's primarily B2B inside sales is where most of my clients come from. So working on things like pitch decks, impact statements, overcoming objections, what sort of collateral should you be sending to the clients? What should your, email content or email cadences look like? So it's a lot of fun. And it certainly, I think, gives me insight into a lot of different types of sales, which I really value. And it's very much a side hustle right now, picking up gigs here and there, mostly from Upwork. But down the road, it's certainly something I'd love to make a full-time gig.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up. I've got something new, actually. I started my podcast, maybe the first 400 episodes. I used to do this, some standard questions, learn a little bit more about the guest. So I'm bringing that back. And so the first thing is I'm going to give you some word pairs, and I just need you to choose, of the word pairs, you just choose the one that pops in your mind first and say it out loud, and we'll go through that real quickly. Okay?
Oh, it's like a quick fire round to wrap up here.
It is, yes.
Okay, I'm ready, Andy.
All right, so it'll be 7 of these word pairs. So first one, buying or selling?
Selling.
Marketing or sales?
Sales.
Skills or mindset?
Mindset.
Training or coaching?
Coaching.
Outbound or inbound?
Outbound.
Persuasion or influence?
Influence.
Face-to-face or Zoom-to-Zoom?
Face-to-face.
All right. Okay, so last book you read on sales, what was it?
So I'm reading Challenger right now.
Challenger Customer, right?
Yep. And right before that, I read Beyond the Sales Process. Really interesting book.
And who's that by?
2 authors. Gosh, you'd think that I would know since I looked at the cover of it like every day for many days. Really interesting book, not just for salespeople, but for account managers, particularly if you're in a role where you are renewing or upselling an account. So I really enjoyed that one as well.
Okay. So favorite non-sales podcast?
Oh my gosh, Annie, this was the hardest question of the entire interview. I am obsessed with podcasts. It would be almost impossible for me to pick one, but I can tell you, and we all have like our sort of podcasts that are the old classics, the Radio Lab sorts of podcasts. But there's 2 that I love right now. One is called Flash Forward. It's a futurist podcast, which is just, it really makes my brain just, it's very compelling. And the second one is Every Little Thing. And have you listened to that one? Oh my God. it warms my heart. There's an episode on pink flamingos and how they are the most astounding animal of all animals in the animal kingdom. It's a good place to start.
That's a good one.
I think to be totally honest, my attention span has not been as lengthy during times of pandemic as it might usually be. So
I think a lot of people share that.
I'm really loving the short kind of punchy podcasts where they're, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And then when I'm ready to dig in, I'm going to, do a podcast like the Sales Enablement or a Stuff You Should Know that are longer, but it's nice to have those shorter ones to listen to as well.
Well, good. So, Leslie, it's been a real pleasure.
Same. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk and look forward to doing it again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank my guest, Leslie Venetz, for sharing her story with us today. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, to Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating and a review, let us know how we're doing, but we'd certainly appreciate that. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Companies spend over $20 billion on sales training every year. But if you ask the average rep how they learn to sell, the answer is almost always not training, but rather a great coach. This October, we're going to prove the value of sales coaching once and for all by finding the best sales coaches in the world. Introducing Top Sales Coach 2020. Hosted by RingDNA and the Sales Enablement Podcast with Andy Paul. This is your chance to win the prestige of being named a top sales coach, a $1,000 grand prize, and the opportunity to receive feedback from some of the top sales leaders and coaching experts in the world. Enter the competition in 3 easy steps. Step 1. Choose one of 3 pre-recorded sales calls at topcoach.ringdna.com. Step 2. Record a 1 to 2 minute video coaching the rep from your call of choice. Step 3. Submit your video and wait for the votes to start rolling in. Go to topcoach.ringdna.com and battle for the sales coaching crown.